I spent my entire life savings to give my parents the retirement they had dreamed about for decades. I thought the hardest part would be working endless shifts, sacrificing my own future, and keeping the surprise hidden until the perfect day. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching my father's own sister destroy everything in less than 24 hours. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a senior physiotherapist at a rehabilitation clinic in Manchester. For almost 10 years, I lived as though half my salary didn't exist, while my friends booked holidays in Spain, upgraded their cars, and posted photos from luxury weekends in the Lake District. I picked up evening appointments, worked private patients on Saturdays, and quietly transferred every extra pound into a savings account no one knew about except my husband, Daniel. People often assumed I was obsessed with saving money. Daniel would laugh and ask, "Are you secretly planning to buy a castle one day?" I'd smile and tell him, "Just trust me." Even saying my real plan out loud felt too precious, as though life might somehow steal it if too many people knew. My parents, Michael and Margaret, had spent nearly 40 years building a simple life in a quiet village just outside York. My father worked as a mechanic until arthritis slowly robbed the strength from his hands. My mother spent most of her life working at a local primary school while somehow keeping our family together through every financial storm that came our way. They never complained. Even when they struggled to pay the mortgage after the financial crisis, they made sure I finished university without worrying about tuition or rent. Years later, I discovered they had quietly refinanced their home to help me complete my degree. They never expected me to repay them, but I never forgot. That was the moment I made myself a promise. One day, before they retired, I would give them something they could never give themselves: complete financial freedom. After years of saving, investing carefully, and giving up almost every luxury, I finally had enough to pay off every remaining penny of their mortgage. Their 40th wedding anniversary was only 3 weeks away, and I had already arranged everything down to the smallest detail. I honestly believed nothing could ruin the happiest day of my parents' lives. I had absolutely no idea that my father's own sister had already started making plans of her own. The only people who knew about my plan were Daniel, because he had helped me deal with the solicitor and the bank, and my younger brother, Liam, who lived in Edinburgh and had promised to fly down for Mum and Dad's anniversary without giving away the surprise. I was careful not to tell anyone else. Looking back now, I realize that keeping one particular person in the dark may have been my biggest mistake. My Aunt Susan, my father's older sister, had always treated my parents as though they were the less successful branch of the family. She and her husband, Richard, lived in a large detached house in Cheshire, and she never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how well they were doing. Her comments were never openly cruel. They came wrapped in smiles. "Oh, Michael has always been happy with so little. Margaret never cared about expensive things anyway. I suppose not everyone is meant to enjoy retirement." Most people laughed politely and moved on. I never did. I saw the way my father's smile faded for just a second every time she spoke. Despite that, Dad continued inviting Susan to birthdays, Christmas dinners, and anniversaries. He always said, "She's still my sister." 3 weeks before the celebration, Daniel and I drove to York to finalize everything. The bank confirmed the mortgage would be completely discharged on the Monday. Before the anniversary, I arranged for the paperwork to be framed as the centerpiece of the evening. We booked a private chef to prepare my parents' favorite meal, ordered fresh flowers for the garden, and even hired a local photographer to capture the moment they realized their home finally belonged to them. Everything felt perfect. Then, 4 days before the anniversary, Susan unexpectedly called my father. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When I asked Dad what she wanted, he smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh, just family catching up." Something about his voice felt different. For the first time since I started planning this surprise, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Susan couldn't possibly know about the mortgage. She couldn't know what I'd spent nearly a decade building toward. What I didn't know was that while I was carefully planning the happiest day of my parents' lives, my aunt had quietly begun planning something that would leave my mother in tears, my father speechless, and our entire family standing in the middle of their own driveway in complete disbelief. The anniversary arrived on a bright Saturday morning in early September, and everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as I had imagined for years. Daniel left early to meet the florist, while I drove across York to pick up my parents from a neighbor's house. I'd told Mom there was a small family lunch waiting at home, nothing more. She spent the entire drive talking about the flowers she wanted to plant before autumn, completely unaware that by sunset every payment they had made over nearly 4 decades would finally be behind them. As we turned onto their street, my excitement disappeared. A large removal van was parked outside their house. At first, I assumed one of the neighbors was moving. Then I noticed the front garden. The flower pots Mum had carefully arranged were pushed against the fence. Garden furniture had been stacked beside the garage, and dozens of cardboard boxes covered the driveway. My father frowned. I don't remember anyone saying the neighbors were moving. Neither did I. The moment I stepped out of the car, my stomach tightened. The front door was wide open. Inside, strangers were carrying furniture through the hallway. Before I could even ask what was happening, Aunt Susan walked out onto the porch wearing the confident smile she always seemed to have whenever she believed she was in control. "There you are," she said cheerfully, as though she had been expecting us. "Perfect timing." My mother looked around in confusion. "Susan, what's going on?" "Oh, don't worry," she replied, waving a hand dismissively. "We've been getting everything organized." "Organized for what?" I asked. She looked directly at me before answering. "For Richard and me." For a second, nobody spoke. Then she pointed toward the downstairs extension. "We've decided it's time we all started thinking practically. This house is far too big for your parents now. Richard and I are going to move into the ground floor permanently. It'll be easier for everyone as they get older." I honestly thought she was joking. Then I saw Richard carrying one of their suitcases into my parents' living room. My mother's face turned completely white. Dad stared silently at his own sister as though he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. And before either of my parents could say a single word, Susan smiled and calmly added something that made my blood run cold. "You won't have to worry about making decisions anymore. I've already taken care of everything." For a long moment, nobody said a word. My aunt stood in the middle of my parents' living room with the same confidence she had walked in with. But for the first time that afternoon, I saw uncertainty on her face. I stepped forward and placed a folder on the dining table. "I didn't spend 10 years sacrificing my dreams so someone else could rewrite my parents' future," I said. My father looked at me confused. I opened the folder and slid the documents toward him. The mortgage was paid off 3 days ago. Silence. My mother's hands began to tremble as she read the first page. My father adjusted his glasses before the words finally sank in. Paid in full. No balance remaining. The house legally belonged to them, free and clear. Tears rolled down my mother's cheeks. You did this for us?" my father whispered. I smiled through my own tears. "You spent your lives giving Liam and me every opportunity you never had. This is my chance to give something back," my aunt interrupted. "But we're family. We only wanted to help." I looked directly at her. "Helping begins with asking permission. What you did was try to take advantage of 2 kind people who trusted you." Just then, our solicitor arrived with the final registered documents. After a brief conversation, he calmly informed my aunt and uncle that they had no legal right to occupy the property and asked them to remove everything they had brought inside. This time nobody argued. One by one, the boxes disappeared. The furniture was loaded back into the van. Within half an hour, the house looked exactly as it had that morning. That evening, we rehung the decorations, shared dinner in the garden, and celebrated not only my parents' anniversary, but the beginning of a new chapter, one without debt, fear, or uncertainty. Before we left, my father hugged me tighter than ever before. Quietly, he said, "This home was built with our hard work, but today you protected it with your love." As I watched my parents close their front door that night, I realized the greatest inheritance a family can leave isn't money or property. It's knowing that when the people you love need you most, you'll always stand beside them.